Welcome, pre-meds all over the nation. We're sure glad you've joined us today in this wonderful, what we call Crazy Mcat Day. We're giving away tens and tens of thousands of dollars of scholarships and prizes. We're giving free training, tutoring, support in regards to MCAT and admission support. My name is Roger Muir. I'm the Vice President of Student Success here at Altius, and we're streaming from our headquarter offices in Provo, Utah, and we're excited that you've joined us. I want to spend a minute at this segment to really focus in on the application experience and give you some admission and application support. We're going to be joined by our good friend, Dr. Michael Larson, who's currently doing his residency. And so I'm going to bring him on to the screen with us, and I'm going to share you his bio so you get to know him a little bit. I want to read it because it's very impressive, and I don't want to leave anything else. Dr. Michael Larson currently serves as the chair of the Altius Admissions Committee, of which he has been a part for the last 4 years. He's a former graduate of the Altius MCAT prep course, which helped him earn a full-ride, merit-based scholarship to the University of Oklahoma College of Medicine, where he trained. Dr. Larson is the recipient of the Diane Heaton Award for Medical Professionalism, which is a prestigious Oklahoma University College of Medicine Dean's Award. He's a member of the Alpha Omega Alpha Honor Medical Society, and he serves as a member of the admissions committee while he was at Oklahoma University. He has significant experience in the medical school admissions process. Dr. Larson is currently in his third year otolaryngology head of neck and surgery residency in Virginia. And he has had various research interests in head and neck serological oncology. It's an honor for me to work with him on a regular basis, and it's a pleasure that he's taken time out of his schedule to train and support you. Dr. Larson, welcome to our Crazy MCAT Day. Just getting a second for him to get logged in here. We should be connected. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Awesome. So glad to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy. Sorry about that. I got to adjust this here. Happy to be here today. And thank you for the nice introduction. So yeah, I'm really excited to be able to talk with all of you today and give you a little bit of an overview of the admissions process. Congratulations to all of you at being at this point in your careers. It's a long road, and you've worked very hard to get to where you are today. We're just really excited to be a part of your journey going forward, hopefully. So today, seeing both those students who are applying this year and are in the process of getting their applications ready, but I also want to talk to those students who are a little bit farther back in the process and are coming up, maybe applying next year or the year after, because I think you can never start too early on the admissions process, and that's very important. So while I'm talking today, I'm going to probably talk for about 15-20 minutes, and I'll give you all a chance to answer or to ask questions. I'm happy to answer them. So if while I'm talking questions come up, please write them down or send them in the chat, and we will get to them towards the end, okay? All right, then without further ado, we will get started. So I want to start out talking about the timeline for the application and the admissions process a little bit. Like I said, it's never too early to get started. So for the 2022 admission cycle, the AMCAS application will open in exactly 47 days from now. So that's Monday, May 3rd at 9:30 a.m. you can log in, open your application, and start working on it, or start putting it in the computer. And the application will open but won't be sent to the medical schools until June 25th at 7 a.m. That's 100 days from now. So you've got some time. But don't let that time fool you. It's going to fly by super quickly. And so my recommendation to get started today, right now, after watching this crazy MCAT day today, go and start writing. Start reviewing the things that you've done so far and the things that you need to do going forward in order to be a successful medical school applicant. So if you're applying this year and you haven't started writing your personal statement, I'd recommend starting that right now. And then if you haven't started gathering together and organizing your 15 activities section, I would recommend getting that started. Now, the AMCAS application consists of those two sections as well as a few others, but we're going to focus on those two, the personal statement and the 15 activities section. We'll spend most of our time talking about the 15 activities today, and we have some great resources for personal statements as well, but we're not going to spend our time with that today. So, like I said, if you're applying this cycle, it's time to evaluate what you've done so far and start writing about them, the activities that you've done. And if you're getting ready to apply in the next year or two, look at what you've done and start seeing, what areas do I need to improve on? And we're going to go through each area today and talk about things that you can do to make yourself competitive in each one of those areas. But you should start now. And as you go through those activities, keep track of your hours, keep track of what's going on, so that when you get to the point where you're ready to submit your application, it's not a scramble to try and remember everything that you've done. So we're going to start by talking about the different aspects of the 15 activities section. So we call it the 15 activities section. It's just the activities section in the AMCAS application. You can put in up to 15 experiences or activities that you have done in your preparations for medical school, and 3 of those are labeled as most meaningful or most important experiences, and we'll get back to that a little later, but that gives you a chance to spend more time talking about those things and why they were so meaningful to you. Now, there's a lot of different options to categorize your activities. I'm going to talk about 6 of them. So, talking today about clinical experience, volunteerism, research, physician shadowing, leadership, and paid employment. There are other sections on the AMCAS application, but we're not going to spend as much time talking about those today. We'll touch on them a little bit at the end. So first off, clinical experience. This to me is one of the most important sections of the application, because you want to go to medical school and you want to be in a clinical role, most likely, and we want to see that you understand what that really means. What does it mean to be a part of clinical medicine? Clinical experience is not shadowing. So I think that's a thing that some students get into. If they're just there watching, that doesn't really count as clinical experience. We want you to be in the game. We want you to be helping, doing something, taking care of patients, being part of the team, and that is counted as clinical experience. What can that look like? Some students are EMTs or phlebotomists, nurses, medical assistant, any type of tech position, anesthesia tech, radiology tech, ultrasound tech. All these tech positions are great ways to get your clinical experience in. You could be an orderly. You could be taking vitals at a free clinic. You can be working as a medical interpreter or volunteering in some other capacity where you're helping the medical team and working as part of that team. So we want to see that you participate in that team and spend a significant amount of time doing this. Like I said, I always looked very highly upon clinical experience, and I know that many of my fellow admissions committee members feel the same way. Now, there is a caveat to that. We're living in the time of a pandemic, and it's not as easy to get into the hospital system to volunteer or to spend time with patients. And that does change things, as things go improving with the vaccine and the coronavirus is more controlled. Some of those options might open back up for some of the younger students. But for those who are kind of now, I wouldn't stress out about it too much. Just do the best and realize that everybody is in your same situation. And we're definitely very cognizant of that, as are all the admissions committee members across the country. You're not alone in having trouble getting into the hospital to volunteer. Moving on to volunteerism. So volunteerism is any sort of volunteer activity that you're participating in, and it can be very diverse. I think there's this thought out there that some students believe that they can only volunteer in a medical capacity. I have to be at a free clinic, I have to be, in the hospital doing something with medicine, and that's just not true. We like to see volunteerism from a very diverse group of things. So, working at the Boys and Girls Club, you can work at a free clinic. Anything, time that you're spent volunteering is important, and you should keep track of that. A note on that, though, you should have at least some medical volunteerism. You want to be a physician, and we'd like to see you spending some time doing something medically related, and that's pretty broad. But I wouldn't just limit yourself to medical volunteer activities. Now, I feel very strongly about this next point, that I would rather see less number of volunteer activities and that are higher quality, longer in duration, more meaningful than just a large number of one-day activities where you spent a day cleaning up, or these one-time things. Maybe you went on a week-long mission trip. Those things are great. But I think the things that really stand out is when someone has dedicated their time over months or years to the same volunteer activity and really made a difference. Because that shows dedication, that shows that you're in it for the long run, and that it's not just something you're doing to get into medical school. I think that says a lot about you, and so that's important to us. When you go to write about these activities, we want you to write about the things that you've learned from the activities and about the impact that the activities had on you and that you've had on the people you've worked with. Without being arrogant, you can tell us, the impact that you've had on those that you've volunteered and helped. So also a very important section. I will say, students that put in a large number of volunteer activities that don't have any depth or meaning to them don't do well. So I'll just like to reiterate, it is better for you to find something that you can be dedicated to and do on a weekly basis for months or years at a time, and then those will definitely have more weight in your application. All right, moving on to research. Research is important. If you're not doing research, you should be doing research. You need to find a way to get involved with research. This does not have to be medical research. It doesn't have to be in the medical field at all. We just want to see that you know how to do research, you know how to go through the process, you know how to write a scientific question and then design a study to answer that scientific question. Being part of the research process is important because research guides and drives so much of what we do in medicine. We don't do anything if it's not evidence-based, if we can help it. And so part of doing research is that later you'll be able to interpret research and be able to tell for yourself, is this good research or is this bad research? And can I base my patient care off of these things? So find some way to get involved in research, whether that's at your university or you can go to some of the medical schools around, have pre-med spots or undergraduate spots in their research labs. When it comes to research, if you can find a way to present your research and or publish your research, that's the best. So that's the gold standard and most impressive, but that's not always the case, and it doesn't always happen. And so it doesn't have to be that way. But be a part of a research lab, and then let us know what you learned and what your role was in the research team. Now, something for those that are currently filling out their applications or getting close, there's a temptation when describing your research to be overly technical, to try and sound smart. And many students do this, and it ends up hurting you, because those reviewing your applications, they're smart people, but we're not as smart as we seem. Sometimes I read some research and I have no idea what you're talking about. And I'm sitting there scratching my head saying, well, I don't know anything about whatever it is you're talking about. And so simple, down, like like the way you would describe your research to your family is okay, because that helps. I mean, it's easier to read, and it makes your interviewer or the person reviewing your application not have to think. And I'll tell you, most of the time when these admissions committee members are reviewing your application, it's after a long day in the operating room, after a full day of clinic, and they're looking through your application and they're tired. And sometimes the easier, more concise things to read are so much more enjoyable to read and stand out. All right, so moving on, we're going to talk about physician shadowing. So you should have shadowing. You should have a lot of shadowing. It's very important. If someone submits a medical school application without shadowing experience, it's a big red flag to me. It means they don't know what they're getting themselves into. So the other thing is that this physician shadowing should only take up, one section on your 15 activities. It should not be more than one activity. If you've shadowed multiple physicians, I would recommend that in the section where you write down what you've done, you write each physician's name, specialty, and the hours you spent with them. And then at the very bottom, you can give us a one-sentence description about maybe something that you learned during your shadowing. I don't like to see applications where, activity number 1 is I shadowed Dr. blah, 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 who is a family practice physician. Activity number 2, shadowed Dr. Jones, he's a cardiologist. And then a long description about what you learned, because shadowing is important, but it's almost a checkbox. We just like to see that you've done it. We like to see that you've looked at multiple specialties, and that you can see that it's something, that medicine is something that you want to be involved in, and then we move on. So the other thing I will say is make sure you're shadowing a physician, so an MD or a DO. Shadowing with PAs or nurse practitioners doesn't count for medical school in most cases. All right, moving on, leadership. So leadership, there's a specific drop-down box for leadership on the application, and there are specific leadership activities, but some activities can be leadership. I mean, maybe you put them in the clinical experience section or the volunteerism section, but they also show leadership. So keep that in mind. Like for example, if you were an after-school tutor, or you worked as a TA for a class, to me that shows leadership. You spent time mentoring and working with others, but you don't specifically have to put that in the research section. I'm sorry, not research, the leadership section. Now the elite applications, or the best that I see, show that they started in an organization, and maybe the pre-med club, for example. They came in as a freshman and they did their time in the pre-med club, and then they worked up, became the treasurer, then they worked their way up and they became the vice president. Eventually they became the president of the pre-med club. And then they show that, as my time as a treasurer, we brought in this much money in donations, and as my time as a vice president, we did this, and my time as a president, we improved this way. So you show that in your leadership positions, you affected change, or you improved things, or you served effectively. Those are the elite or best applications. And so I love to see things like that. Moving on to paid employment. Some people, when they see this section in the application, ask themselves, why is this here? Why is this important? The way that I look at paid employment, sometimes it is clinical employment. Maybe you worked in the hospital for years and years. That's important. But I think even if you did a job that was outside the hospital, for example, myself, I LA as an undergrad, and I put that in my application, and I had some interesting conversations during my medical school interviews about that, and it opened a door to talk to my interviewers and created a connection. So we want to see what you do, even if you're flipping burgers somewhere. I want to know about it, because it shows to me that you're working hard outside of your research, your shadowing, your volunteerism, you're studying at school, but also you're working to support yourself, pay for all this stuff, and working for school. And also, it shows us that maybe you don't. If it's an application that doesn't have as many other things, but then you look at the paid employment section, and they're working a lot to support themselves. That's something we take into account. Is important. All right, moving on. There's some other sections that I think are important. There's a section for significant awards or scholarships. Put those things in if you have them. I know that I like to see them if they're there, and other AdCom members do as well. And they help us to understand you better. They help us to, at times in interviews, we ask about them and want to know more about them. And so those are good things to add. I wouldn't completely fill your application up with awards and scholarships, because we want to see all these other things that we talked about before these awards and scholarships. But these are important things to include. The other thing that I like to see, and I really enjoy, especially when it comes time for interviews, is a section that's dedicated to hobbies and interests that you may have. So I would take one activity, one section of your activities, and dedicate it to what you like to do. I like to rock climb in my spare time. I read books. I wakeboard. I build things out of wood. Whatever it is you do, we want to know that, because it shows us that you are a real person and you have things that you like to do outside of work, and that's important. And also, when it comes time for interviews, I loved having conversations with applicants about the things that they put in their hobbies and interest sections. And I'll tell you that at times during an interview, we would get so caught up in that section that we'd forget to talk about anything else. But in the end, it was a great interview, because I remember you, and when I go to the meeting where we sit down and talk about every applicant, I'm gonna say, yeah, I like this person a lot. Let's bring them in. So those are kind of the main points of the 15 activities section. Now, on that 15 activities section, you need to choose 3 to be your most meaningful activities. Now, this is very important to me, because sometimes students choose activities as their meaningful activities that, to me, don't stand out as meaningful. So when you are writing these sections, ask yourself, was this activity one of the most meaningful in my life or journey to medicine? And what would I do without this activity? Why was it so important to me? Did it change me? Did it help me understand medicine? Did it help me understand myself? Ask those questions, because they're so important. If you're going to say that this is a meaningful activity and you're going to spend almost another page writing about it, make sure that it's really meaningful, because it really stands out when you write about something that isn't very meaningful. And it's clear it's not meaningful to you when we read it, if it's just another run-of-the-mill activity. So to finish up, just talk about a few general considerations when you're writing this 15 activities section. Things that will sink your application. Number 1 is arrogance. Make sure when you're writing that you do so in a way that doesn't come across as arrogant. And if you're not sure, have 25 other people read your application and tell you, does this sound like I'm a humble person or an arrogant person? We don't want you in medicine if you are an arrogant person. That is not conducive to learning and working as a team in medicine, which is so important. Next, use simple, concise language. Like I said earlier, people reading your application are smart, but they're not as smart as you think. We like to read simple, easy to read things. I still want you to sound educated and make it look like you know what you're doing. But honestly, it takes a more educated person to be concise, and then it takes to use a lot of big words, and that might not be so clear. All right, last few things. You should fill up your 15 activities section. If you don't have 15 activities to talk about, then you should probably spend some more time getting yourself ready for medical school. Now, You may have a little bit less than 15, maybe 10 or 12. If those are very meaningful and have a lot of depth, then that's great. I wouldn't worry about it. But let's say you have 15 activities that are all one-day things. That's nothing. So, and even worse than that is having 5 activities that are superficial and not. So you should try and fill up your 15 activities section. And then lastly, I know there's going to be some questions that come up about overlapping activities or double dipping. So you should not double dip. There's some nuance to this. For example, let's say you spent 3 years working at a free clinic, and in your last year working there, you worked as the student director of the clinic. In my opinion, I'm okay to see those split up as 2 activities. One is leadership, one is volunteering or clinical experience. But I would try to avoid double dipping as much as possible, because we pick up on it. And when I see students who double dip, it says to me that they're just trying to fill up space. So try to avoid that. Don't fill up your application with fluff. Make it meaningful. And you're not doing yourself any favors if you apply with a weak application. So if you see that you're writing it and you're seeing like, wow, I'm just filling this up with fluff, I don't have anything meaningful, take a year off and do something meaningful, because it's going to be so much better for you in the long run. So that's all I have today. Thank you for letting me spend some time with you and talk to you about the admissions process. I'm happy now to take any questions, and best of luck to all of you.
Dr. Larson, thank you so much. We appreciate your expertise and your sharing of that information. We do have a few questions that have come through in the chat, so I do want to look at that closely for a second. Let me see if we can answer 1 or 2 of those before we move on.
Let's see. I've got a few here that I can see.
Perfect. Go ahead and pull them up. Okay.
So, does working as a receptionist in a clinic count as clinical experience? It depends what your role is as the receptionist. If you're, answering phone calls and then just scheduling appointments, I would say not really. If you're, helping in the process of calling patients back to, tell them about their lab results or things like that. If you're acting in a more clinical role as a receptionist, then I would, as long as you can explain that, then I would say, okay, that counts. But typically I would say probably not. It looks like there's some other questions about overlapping experiences. I think we answered that. If it's a paid experience and a leadership experience and a clinical experience, I mean, just choose one and put it in, and you can talk about it that way. Consistency and volunteering. What if you started later on and can only get a couple of months under your belt instead of years? That's okay. Do the best you can, right? So you're not going to always be able to have years of volunteering. But just if let's say you started something new a couple months ago, just show that, I've been doing this consistently for 2 months now, and I can plan to continue doing this for every week until I, leave for medical school. Just do the best that you can. I wouldn't say there's any like particular cutoff, like, hey, this 2 months is meaningful enough for me. It's dependent on the, it's case by case basis. But I'd say overall, long-term dedicated positions are much more meaningful to me than I spent a Saturday cleaning up the park, Let's see. How many hours of shadowing would you say makes you competitive? Do you have a minimum or maximum? I would say I'd like to see, 30 to 40 hours of shadowing, and in various specialties. I think, you could have hundreds of hours of shadowing, but I think there's a point where there's diminishing returns. So, just show me that you spent a half day with 4 or 5 different specialists or different specialties. And I think for me, that makes me happy. Let's see. You got any other questions? Are there any drawbacks of just applying with whatever you have done in terms of volunteering and scores and not getting in, and applying again the following year with improvements to the application? So I would say yes, there's a drawback. When you apply as a reapplicant, that's the first thing that's going to show up, that you are a reapplicant. That's not automatically a bad thing, but then you need to go through and you need to show, why didn't you succeed the first time? You need to show that, in that time since I was rejected from medical school, I've done this, 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 and this to address my weaknesses, and to fix those areas where I was unsuccessful. So I think your first shot is your best shot. And so if you realize that you don't have enough, take some time off and just apply next year, because I know that sounds like it's the end of the world, but that year is going to fly by so fast. And I think you're going to be a better applicant. You're going to be more mature, and you're going to be more ready to be successful in medical school for doing that. And it takes a lot of courage to say, hey, I'm not ready. But as an admissions committee member, I see that. We see that, and that's meaningful to us. So that being said, if there's any reapplicants here, I also have respect for you, because you're not giving up, and I see that when I see reapplications. If you've been rejected and then you're improving and trying to make that right and get better so you can get in, that means a lot to us as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I know you're very busy and have other things you need to move on to, so I appreciate you scheduling this in with us this afternoon. Wish you and your family your best.
Thank you. Best of luck to all of you.
Thank you. And let me just share with you a thought that when we talk about mentoring at Altius, we're talking about not just having a teacher or an instructor. When you use the word tutor on campus, typically that means like a TA or a peer. If you say tutor in regards to most prep companies, it kind of means an instructor. Oftentimes they might teach the LSAT on one day and the GMAT on a different day and a GRE. And then they'll teach you the Mcat, but they haven't necessarily taken those exams themselves. And that's okay as long as you know the credentials of what you're working with. When I say mentor at Altius, I'm talking about somebody that's taken our course, scored a 515 to a 528 on their own Mcat, and have actually succeeded at the very thing that you're hoping to accomplish. So when we say that in regards to admissions, the same is true in regards to our business model. Individuals like Dr. Larson, who have actually succeeded in this process, receive multiple acceptance letters. Not just that, one, I hope, I don't care where I go, I just want to get into medical school. I'm talking about somebody that actually worked through their application to a level of really being able to choose the school of their choice. And often that comes with scholarships and awards and things of that nature as well. That's really the type of candidate or applicant we want to create. With that in mind, one of the things to consider is this workbook. It's the Altius workbook that really allows you to see all the different steps of what is going to go into your application, and gives you a place to compile those before you actually submit them into your AMCAT. Little food for thought and some consideration for you. With that, I'm going to post a link on the chat here that will give you a connectivity to our website, so you can see some of those additional resources and tools to get additional help, like the things Dr. Larson was touching on. Who's ready for a drawing? Who's ready for a prize? To that end, I want to award an Emerald course. This is a $489 personal statement review. You basically get your personal statement ready to the point that you want to submit it on your application. But before you submit it, you send it to our admissions committee, and they're going to review it and help you identify additional ways to enhance that and move it past just punctuation, but into some of the talking points that Dr. Larson was addressing, and really making sure that after all these years of achieving and accomplishing, you can really tell that story in a powerful way. So to that end, we're pleased to assist Tanisha Martha Saran. Sorry for not saying that right. Tanisha from Harvard University there in Cambridge. You have just received this free personal statement review. My team will email and text you, and they'll work out the details of you being able to accept that award. Okay? Congratulations, Tanisha. In addition to that, I'm feeling pretty excited. Let's give out another Mcat Elite course. This is a 11-week experience, classes, textbook, practice exams, working with our mentors who got near perfect scores. It's a $2,499 program. And it looks that we drew out the name of Alyssa Spunder. Alyssa Spunder from Royal there in Chicago. Congratulations, Alyssa. We look forward to awarding you this prize. Exciting stuff for all of you. I hope this has been a fun, crazy, exciting day for you. I hope this training and development has been a benefit to you and your career. We know we can't answer everything in a few minutes, but we certainly have a team that knows how to and can assist you even further. So connect with us on our website, altiustestprep.com, or call some of the numbers that we provided to you. We'll look forward to helping you. Our next section at the top of the hour is going to be focused on practice exams. And this is so important. I think sometimes we gather in equipment. It's like, I'm going to get a bowling ball, a tennis ball, a baseball, a golf club, and somehow prepare for a baseball game. Not all the equipment is really helpful for the World Series. If you know, in fact, the game you need to win at, you might want to avoid some of these sporting equipment and make sure you have exactly what's going to help you win at this specific game. And so that's what we're going to talk about at the top of the hour, real MCAT practice test. Okay? And to that end, we'll probably give away some free practice exams as well. So we look forward to talking to you again at the top of the hour. Best wishes, everybody.